This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 634, entitled Masculism, the Core Ideas. Description. The ideas of the manosphere are now at the tipping point of going mainstream. After my 2-hour interview by Brian Rose of London Real, described in the previous flyer, number 642, I can use the link of this video to great effect in approaching other media outlets, trying to persuade them to spread Mascus ideas so that they go mainstream and reach the masses, the millions, the billions. This flyer is a brief introduction to the core ideas of Masculism that will be sent to these media outlets around the world, starting with the universities, then to the major newspapers and magazines, and to major bloggers on the internet. Now the flyer itself. Masculism, the Core Ideas, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. The word masculist is the obvious male equivalent of the word feminist, so masculism is men's lib. The core idea of masculism is that it is a rebellion by men against being man-slaves to women, working for women for decades of men's lives just to get a bit of sex from women. Masculists claim that it was men who liberated women from household drudgery by giving women science-based medicine, so that women now have a life expectancy of 85 years. Men gave women the pill, household gadgets, higher education, so that women now typically have 0, 1 or 2 kids, so have a career window of half a century. The Masculists are now standing up, pointing the finger at women, claiming that, quote, now that women can work, they must work. Anything else is man's slavery and is hence hated and a war issue to Masculists, end quote. Masculinity fluffydom, in brackets, a fluffy, based on the word fluff, is a masculinist label for a traditional woman who expects to be able to live off the money and labour of a man for decades, close bracket, as manslavery, and manslavery as slavery, hence the masculinist hatred of fluffies. Masculists claim that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that in fact women's oppression of men is a lot worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men are horrible and last decades. The worst 3 ways that women oppress men are women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering. Masculists have a hatred of gender criminal women who commit these horrible gender crimes against men and punish them so severely that Masculists effectively exterminate such women by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, thus forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and spat at by an increasingly masculisted male population, and even by a growing female masculist population. Masculists are abolitionists who see manslavery as literally 1,000 times bigger problem than was Negro slavery, given the numbers. There were several million Negro slaves in the US during the slave period, and there are several billion man-slaves in the world today. Negro slavery was the root cause of the US Civil War. Masculists are at war against fluffies and fluffy feminists, aiming to wipe them out by forcing women to FIP up, in brackets FIP, F-I-P, equals financially independent person, close brackets, by bothering to get career competent educations at high school and college so that they can be FIPs as adults and not expect fluffy style to manslave a man for decades of his life. Masculists put enormous moral pressure on young women to fip up or to be severely punished by not getting a man. Masculists predict that in the next 5 to 10 years, several million young women will suicide over not fipping up, by being viciously rejected by young masculisted men who will hurl abuse at them, calling them, quote, manslaving, divorce-raping vermin, utterly dismissing them both socially and sexually, forcing women to fip up or to rot on the shelf. A woman who does not fip up, who chooses to study career incompetent majors, is labelled a fluffy crapper by Masculists, since she studies fluffy crap majors that will make her a fluffy as an adult, and hence a manslaver and a likely divorce rapist. The manosphere, that is men discussing men's gender issues on the internet, estimate that about 80% of young women today are fluffy crappers and hence future fluffies. Divorce rape is what happens to roughly one father in 4 in the fluffy feminist, that is, a feminist who has fluffy expectations towards men, seeing men as cash machines to pay for women to have babies, close brackets, dominated divorce courts that the feminists took over in the 70s, making them slaughterhouses for divorcing fathers. So it's not surprising that now, in many Western countries, 2/3 of young men reject marriage and paternity, choosing to live the MGTOW, MGTOW, men going their own way lifestyle, spending their money on themselves. Masculists see fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges as hypocrites and genociders. Hypocrites, since these fluffy feminists want equal rights for women in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men to share the burden of earning the living by behaving as fluffies in the divorce courts. And as genociders, since these fluffy feminists have made divorce so shitty for men that they are indirectly wiping out whole populations, since 2/3 of young men now reject marriage and paternity due to the toxicity of the divorce courts controlled by fluffy feminists. In many Western countries, a divorcing father will lose custody of his kids with a 90% probability. He will lose his house to his ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it. He will lose half his wealth and stuff to her, and be forced to make payments to his children he will barely be allowed to see, maybe 2 weekends a month. If his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no legal nor moral obligation on her to fip up and stop manslaving and divorce raping him. Forced fathering is when a woman forces a man to pay for several decades for a kid he doesn't want. The 2 main forms of forced fathering are pill lying and paternity fraud. A woman pill lies when she lies to her man that she's taking the pill, but isn't, gets pregnant, then forces him by law to pay for a kid he never wanted, thus manslaving him for decades. Paternity fraud is when a woman lies to her man that the kid growing in her is his when she knows it's not. Masculists want paternity fraudsters to be given 15 years in jail for a gender crime that Masculists see as more serious than rape, which usually gets a man a 10-year jail sentence. Perhaps over 10% of all pregnancies involve paternity fraud. Masculists want the creation of GECs, GECs, Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, which is far from being the case in society today, which in gender political terms is gynocentric. The masculist half of these GECs will legislate the PARA, that's paternity rejection right, so that men have the same legislated right to reject an unwanted pregnancy as women already have, that is, the MARA, maternity rejection right. If the woman goes ahead with the pregnancy after the father has used the PARA, then she has full financial responsibility for the costs of the kid until it is an adult. If she is a FIP, she can afford to do this, hence the enormous importance to masculists for the fipping of women, for the creation of a FIP society, where both sexes are raised and educated to be FIPs, to rid the world of fluffies and fluffy feminists. The GEC Masculist politicians will also legislate the OPTAB, OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth, for all births to block paternity fraud. Masculist theorists are very conscious that the creation of a fit society will go a long way towards solving most of men's gender issues. For example, reforming the divorce courts, creating GECs, systematically men-fairing the gender laws, etc. Masculists expect feminists to be bi-conscious, that is, have both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised. Monoconscious feminists are usually misandrist, since feminism teaches them that gender oppression is a one-way street. Feminism is a deeply misandrist, genocentric ideology that teaches women nothing about how women oppress men. To become bi-conscious, feminists need to learn some masculism. Feminists who remain monoconscious risk losing their bi-conscious masculist boyfriends, who see monoconscious feminists as hypocrites, given the bi-conscious masculist belief that women oppress men worse than vice versa. Masculists target these monoconscious male feminist boyfriends, teaching them masculism, so that these boyfriends become bi-conscious and hence become disgusted at the monoconscious bigotry of their feminist girlfriends, seeing them as MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots. When millions of monoconscious feminists have been dumped by their bi-conscious masculist boyfriends, millions of feminists will convert themselves to bi-consciousness or be forced to rot on the shelf, dying a slow, miserable, manless, childless death, as do 40% of middle-aged women today. Many countries today have birth rates well below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman. Masculists have proposed the MCT, that's Mother Career Timeline, to women, so that women can be both mothers and careerists, so that humanity is not wiped out due to lack of births, and men aren't made manslaves. For an upper middle class woman, her MCT would be as follows. She gets her master's degree at 23. And works in her career competent profession for 5 years, during which time she marries and has her first kid at 29 and her second at 31, thus fulfilling her civic duty to reproduce the next generation. When her second kid is 4 and off to kindergarten, she is 35. She then returns to her career full-time, so as not to be a fluffy manslaver of her husband. During the 6 years she is at home raising her small children, the government gives her a maternity wage so that the husband does not bear the stressful, full burden of earning the money to keep the whole family financially afloat. Child raising will be seen as the responsibility of the whole population via taxation. Masculists label those adults who don't have children life leechers, who leech off the sacrifices of their parents who raised them, but who do not return the favour to the next generation. Cheers, Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Click on the Masculist tab for 600 plus Masculist essays and their videos. See also a London Real interview on Masculism at AI will kill 1 billion people, do we create our exterminators, ? Professor Hugo de Garis, London Real, in brackets, see the last half hour of this 2-hour interview for the Masculist segment. Ciao.